All right, I'm about to log in, guys. Just give me a few minutes, and I'm seeing only two persons, not knowing sure why. One sec, guys. All right, evening, everybody. Good evening. My apologies. Just having some technical difficulties. Good evening. I'm not hearing any response.
Evening, sir. I'm still there, work, you know.
Okay, all right. So we'll discuss the paper, but in the interest of time, let's just get quickly in the lesson because I need to wrap up this theories of international trade. So I think the last time we were at absolute advantage and we had started discussing comparative advantage. What we're going to discuss today is just look at a kind of comparison between absolute advantage and comparative advantage, and then we move along. These theories are actually not very difficult to discuss in terms of, where am I? Comparing both, right? So let's take a listen. And
to explain why countries trade, we must look at a little
economic theory.
And as I said to you guys before, it's very important that at some point in time, you're either watching the recordings and or taking notes as well as going on Canvas because the information is there, okay? So they're comparing absolute advantage and comparative advantage in terms of international trade.
To explain why countries trade, we must look at a little economic theory.
The first concept we'll consider is called the theory of absolute advantage. If a country has the absolute advantage in the production of a good or service, it means it's the most efficient producer of that product. In other words, if all countries use the same inputs in their production process, this country would be able to make more, better quality products than all the others. Let's construct a simplified theoretical example to illustrate the point.
Imagine for a moment that we live in a world where there are only two countries, South Africa and Japan. Now, both countries have differing capabilities to produce two products, wheat and DVDs. Now, over a certain time period, South Africa can either produce 55 bags of wheat or 11 DVDs using all their resources. Japan, on the other hand, can either produce 18 bags of wheat or 72 DVDs using all the available inputs that they have. So, knowing that each country must choose how to allocate its resources between the production of these two goods, does it make sense for South Africa to produce any DVDs?
The answer is no. Japan is obviously much more efficient in the production of DVDs than South Africa, while South Africa is much more efficient in the production of wheat than Japan. But both countries need both products, so it makes sense for South Africa to provide Japan with South African grown wheat in exchange for DVDs made in Japan.
If each country concentrates on producing what it's naturally good at, if they specialise in that good, both countries can then trade with each other and end up with more of both products than if they tried to produce it all themselves. The consumers in both countries also benefit because they will be buying products made by the most efficient producer.
And according to the economic theory, it means that the price paid for these products should be the cheapest. Why? Well, because the producers making the two products are the most efficient at it and can make more of the product for less than their competitors. Remember that as a consumer, you will not buy the same product from a seller who's more expensive. So the economic principle of absolute advantage is that you should specialize in the production of something that you're good at making. You will be efficient in the production of that good or service, and the price you sell at will be the most competitive. Now, why is this considered so important in economics?
Well, remember, economics is all about satisfying unlimited wants and needs. How can we get all of the things we want with such limited resources? Resources we really can't afford to waste through inefficient production.
Okay, let's try and take the theory a bit further. According to this new table, we assume that South Africa has an absolute advantage with both products. It can efficiently produce either wheat or DVDs. Looking at this new data, it would seem that there is no longer any reason for trade between these two countries.
All right, so one thing I want to point out, and I think I've said it before in terms of absolute advantage, is, and these are the things that you actually could highlight in your paper, whether it be in your final exam, in your tutorial paper, or even in a research paper, is that for absolute advantage, the benefits are that the cost of production is much lower because the country is able to produce it more efficiently. All right, and also because of this, the country is also better able to sell it at a more competitive price in the international market, as well as there's lower labor costs. So the labor cost that goes into it is much lower as opposed to if the other country had produced it or if another country had produced it. So those are the things that I want you to remember. Cost of production is lower, competitive pricing in the international market, efficient means of production, and there's lower labor cost. All right, and sometimes lower labor cost sometimes also mean lower wage input. It could be that there are also greater means of technology that increases the output. All right, but now we're going to look at, this is the part that I want you to pay attention to when you're talking about comparative advantage, because what comparative advantage gets at is that the problem with absolute advantage is that if you follow that model, then countries really won't trade with one another or with each other. Because one country has an absolute advantage, and this one of the disadvantages of absolute advantage. It could be that if I know that I have absolute advantage producing wheat, it means that I too can actually hike up the price, all right, on a country that I know that cannot produce this as well as I can. And this is why we have regulatory bodies in international trade to ensure that, to even regulate pricing and so forth. So let's listen now. The other example now is going to speak to competitive advantage, and I'm going to just bring it back a little for you to understand this. Is it clear, everybody? I just want to find out if it's clear in terms of absolute advantage.
Yes, sir. Getting it, sir.
Okay, all right. So competitive advantage, no, comparative advantage, sorry.
Let's try and take the theory a bit further. According to this new table, we assume that South Africa has an absolute advantage with both products. It can efficiently produce either wheat or DVDs. Looking at this new data, it would seem that there is no longer any reason for trade between these two countries. But this is not quite true. Let's see why.
Remember that each country must decide how to allocate its resources. In a simplified example, we'll say that if South Africa concentrates all of its resources on DVD production, it can make 8 DVDs. But this means losing out on the wheat. And if they focus all their efforts on wheat production, they can produce 40 bags, while sacrificing any DVD production. The best way to help South Africa decide how to allocate resources is to calculate how much it costs to make one DVD. Comparatively, how much wheat does South Africa have to give up to make one DVD? It's not too tricky. Divide 40 by 8, which gives us 5. So for each DVD we produce, we could have grown 5 bags of wheat. In other words,
Anybody knows what they call that in economics? Anybody knows the term, in other words, when you give up something for a greater benefit? Have you guys done introduction to economics or anything like that? Hello?
Yes, sir. Well, I've done it.
What's the term they use when you actually, it's like you trade an immediate benefit for a greater benefit in the future?
Sir, I'm not too, honestly, I'm not too, sir, I'm not, I think I have something to do with like,
Opportunity cost, thank you. That's what it is called.
yeah, that's it, sir. That's it,
Yeah,
sir.
opportunity cost. All right, so let me just back it up a little, just because I wanted to get the comparative advantage.
by 8, which gives us 5. So for each DVD we produce, we could have grown 5 bags of wheat.
So remember now, South Africa has what? An absolute advantage in terms of producing bags of wheat, right? And what they're saying is that, remember now, the two theories really are speaking to the allocation of resources. And these resources include human, labor, capital, and so forth. And they're saying that what makes better sense in terms of international trade and production? Is it that you're supposed to focus on the areas? Is it that you, for example, you should focus on areas that you only have absolute advantage in? Or is it that you're supposed to participate in international trade based on the product that you're more efficiently to produce? So let's just listen a little further.
In other words, each DVD we make costs South Africa 5 bags of wheat. Now, over in Japan, if they choose to produce 4 DVDs, they can't produce any wheat because of their limited resources. And if they focus on just producing the 8 bags of wheat, there's nothing left for DVD production. Doing the maths, 8 divided by 4, we can see that it will cost Japan 2 bags of wheat to make 1 DVD. So, comparing the cost of production in both countries, South Africa has to give up 5 bags of wheat for each DVD it makes, while in Japan, it only costs 2 bags of wheat to make 1 DVD.
Can anybody tell me what that means, or what could you make sense? What could that mean in terms of for both countries? Should the countries trade with each other or based on this metric? And what they're really doing is comparing the cost of production. I think I see somebody saying something in the chat. Does anybody understand how to explain this in terms of the cost of production? All right, how many bags of wheat would it cost South Africa to produce 1 DVD?
Sir, can you repeat the question, please? Sir, I didn't hear your question, sir. Can you repeat the question, please?
How many bags of wheat would it cost South Africa to produce one DVD? The math is in front of you
That would be
guys.
5, sir.
5, right? And how many bags of wheat would it cost Japan to produce one DVD?
1 DVD. That would be 4, sir.
It would be 2.
It's a 2 DVD.
No, how many bags of wheat would it cost South Africa to produce one DVD?
Oh, South Africa.
Right. Japan. How many bags of wheat would it cost Japan to produce one DVD?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, bro. My brain kind of. Yeah. All right. I'm guessing it's a 2 DVD right here, so sir.
No. It's not 2 DVD. Listen. Remember, what you're really doing, you're comparing the cost of production between South Africa and Japan, right? And what they're saying, yes.
5 bags, it costs Africa, and it costs Japan 2 bags.
This country is not Africa, it's South Africa. Africa is not a country, please remember. But thanks for that. Right, and it costs Japan 2 bags. So what does that mean in terms of international trade? If you were advising both countries, what would you tell them to do in terms of international trade of these 2 goods? Who should produce what?
South Africa should produce the wheat, and the other guy the DVDs.
And the other guy, we need a country name. In other words, people, it would cost South Africa more, let's say more, it would cost South Africa more in terms of production to produce one DVD versus Japan in terms of bags of wheat. So it's better for South Africa to produce bags of wheat and export or trade with Japan, and it's better for Japan to produce one DVD to produce DVD and export to Japan. Do you see that? Because it's going to cost if Japan
and export to South Africa, sir.
Yes, and export to South Africa. Thank you. Because what they're getting at, is the efficiency in terms of cost of production. So both countries have it, yes, but who is better able to produce it in terms of lower cost of production? And the explanation.
DVD it makes, while in Japan, it only costs 2 bags of wheat to make 1 DVD.
So DVDs cost more in terms of bags of wheat given up in South Africa than they do in Japan. Or in less clumsy language, it's cheaper for Japan to make DVDs, so Japan should make the DVDs. And it also makes sense that South Africa should produce the wheat. And that's the theory of comparative advantage.
Did we get that? Did we get that? I want for you guys to understand. So what this is showing is that it's actually cheaper for Japan to make the DVDs because it only costs them what? 2 bags of wheat versus South Africa, where it is going to cost them 5 bags of wheat. So it's better for Japan to produce the DVDs, which is, and the reverse is true. It will cost Japan what? 2 bags of wheat to produce 1 DVD versus South Africa is going to cost them 5 bags to produce 1 DVD. So it's better for Japan to produce, not Japan, why do I keep saying Japan? It's better for South Africa to produce bags of wheat. All right. I'm hoping you got that. So there are some general things.
So DVDs cost more in terms of bags of wheat given up in South Africa than they do in Japan. Or in less clumsy language, it's cheaper for Japan to make DVDs, so Japan should make the DVDs. And it also makes sense that South Africa should produce the wheat. And that's the theory of comparative advantage.
All right. So that's the theory of comparative advantage. And as I said before, both theories really speak to the whole notion of cost of production competitive pricing, because if for example Japan is producing DVD, it means that they will be selling it at a lower cost, which would make their pricing competitive. We also spoke to the notion of efficiency, means of production. It means that Japan is more efficiently able to produce DVDs and South Africa is more efficiently able to produce wheat, even though both countries can produce both of them. All right, make sense, guys? Does it make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you're doing your paper or whatever, all you need to do is to find examples. All right, there are many examples, properly cited, of course. Now we go to the notion of cluster. Anybody, when you think of the word cluster, what comes to mind? Cluster.
A group, sir.
So we are talking about cluster. So it's a group. All right. So it could be group of in terms of international trade. What would you think it is a group of? So let me just put group. So what other word can we use for group in terms of international business? Outside of group, what other term could we use? Hello? What other terms could we use instead of group? Come on, guys, it's not that difficult.
So I'm not too sure, sir. Depends on what exactly you're talking about, so maybe you can give me an idea.
You said group, and I'm asking you in terms of international business language. What else? Say group in international business. What else could we be talking about? Or give me an example of group in international business. We actually spoke about it.
So if you're talking about group, maybe you're talking about like a group of like countries or
group of countries. And
so, you know, that's
what are the terms that we use with group of countries?
You know, like a what do you call it, like a trading block, sir, or
right. So we have a trading block. We have regional. We have regions. We have regionalism. We're talking about unions, like the European Union. We're talking about, for example, CARICOM. We're talking about things like NAFTA and so forth. But let us say that we're talking about, I want you to also think about, so let us say that there's a group of countries that comes to some amount of agreement in terms of international trade. So they'll form like a regional bloc, they'll sign multinational, multilateral treaties and so forth. But what if we're talking about, do you think, could it be possible that companies could cluster? Could a group of companies in a country form a group or a trading block or an economic block? Is that possible?
I would think so, sir.
Talk to me, give me an example, or just expound a little bit on that.
Well, sir, I think they could form a cluster based on like similarities of the products that they produce.
But if all of us are similar, why would we form a cluster? If I'm selling Aki and you are selling Aki, why would I want to form a cluster with you?
Sir, okay, so in my view, each of us could have a different advantage, right? So maybe for one person may have the machinery, another one may have the means of transportation.
No, right? No, you're talking. So, that's different. No, we're not talking about the same. No, that's not same. That's difference. In other words, you're talking.
They could do the same thing, sir.
Both do the same thing like what?
But let's say both of us sell Aki, sir. Right. But my operation is more labor intensive, while my competitor may have certain amount of machinery, which may give them an advantage in that area. So
why would I form a cluster with you?
Because I may have, okay, so you may have the machinery, I may have distribution channels, sir. right? Let's say I have distribution channels, the means of moving the goods more efficiently, sir.
But why
Right? So
would
at the
you
end of
move
the
my
day,
goods? No, but hold on. And I'm just playing devil's advocate. Why would you move my goods when both of us sell the same goods?
because I could have access to your machinery, which would allow me to actually process more goods in a short amount of
And I'm
time. So I would
saying,
be more
why would I give my competitor access to my machinery? Why would I do that?
because
That
if
doesn't
we
make business
come
sense.
because I would access my competitors' trading routes, sir. Maybe I
No,
have a
but
difficult. I
no,
may
no, 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 no. There's some, what the law called again? Jesus, my brain is not. It's called trade. I think it's called trade secret. I did this when when I did a course in right. A trade secret is any practice or process of a company that is generally not known outside of the company. So why would I give you my trade secret? Why would I do
I
that?
don't think it would necessarily be a secret in us, sir. Right? Because at the end of the day, each company is striving. Yes, each company is striving to have a competitive advantage, right? But at the end of the day, if we see where we can actually pool our resources, right, and actually it ends up benefiting us, on a larger scale, right? Because sometimes the sum of the products, right, sir, would actually be greater than the sum of the individuals themselves. The sum of the product normally, may come out greater than the individual what do you call it?
And I'm still
Sir, but
playing
I try to
advocates. Yeah, I know. And I'm still playing devil's advocate because I'm saying if you are selling Aki and I'm selling Aki and somebody else is selling Aki, why would I give you access to my machinery? I want to sell. I have absolute advantage. Why would I? And if you're
no,
selling
you
the
don't have
same
the
good.
absolute advantage, sir. That's
But
what
if
I'm
I
trying to say.
no 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 I'm listening to your example. You said that I have machinery and you don't. It means that I can mass produce my Akis and you cannot.
Yeah,
Yours would be more
but what
cost in
do I
labor
have, sir?
intensive.
Sir, but you know, listen to what me say. I have, right?
What
You
you
may
have?
have the machine, but I have the trade routes. I have the means of distribution, sir. So you may find, even though you're mass producing, you're not moving more goods than I am at the end of the day, right, sir? So if we look at
No,
it
that's
and
not
we can say,
possible.
all right,
No, the rule of economics suggests that with mass production, and remember, we looked at it especially during the Industrial Revolution, in terms of mass production. Remember, mass production leads to higher output and lower cost, and makes my company more price sensitive and more competitive in the marketplace because I can mass produce these things. And if you think about any example, think about even our local market and versus foreign direct investment. If, for example, the America, for example, can make carrots produce thousands of carrots within a week because they are doing it in greenhouse or they have machines, and Jamaican farmers are taking a month, and Jamaican farmers are affected by climate change, by rainfall, by hurricane and all of that. There's no way your price is going to be lower than mine. There's no way that is
okay,
possible because
all
I
right,
can mass produce it. You see what I mean?
fair enough, sir. Fair enough with regards to the pricing,
What
right?
you were on a good track. What I thought, this is why I was about to support your point when you said, for example, that if one person sells Aki, but there might be another company nearby that actually has the machine to process the Aki, then there's another company that does the canning. Then you're talking about a cluster because it means that it is an economic space of companies that are what competing with each other to some extent, but also working together. You see what I mean?
Okay, I get it here, sir. I get it.
And that is what happens, for example, with the European Union and even CARICOM. Because remember, Caribbean countries, to some extent, they came together and form a kind of economic bloc or a quote unquote a common Caribbean market. So it's somewhat of a cluster, a regional cluster. Same thing like the European Union. You see what I mean? And even the North American Free Trade Agreement, that is somewhat quote unquote of a cluster, because these are countries that are in the same geographic locations and they're trading with each other. But when they combine together, they work as a unit for outside persons who are trading with them. Make sense?
Yes, sir. Got you.
The perfect example of a cluster in Jamaica is, for example, New Kingston. And I'm talking pre-COVID. New Kingston is an entertainment cluster at night and a business cluster in the day. I wonder if anybody sees New Kingston in that way. Can you think of New Kingston as a business cluster in the day and an entertainment cluster in the night outside of COVID, pre-COVID?
It is, sir. I'm looking at it now, thinking about it.
Why some persons so quiet? Why other persons not talking? Yes, go ahead, Mario. Can you think of another cluster? Can you think of another cluster though in Jamaica, outside of Kingston?
Outside of Kingston. What about like I've been to Mobile, sir.
There you go. What kind of cluster Mobile would be?
I've been on the Ip Strip, sir. I think but there's still some amount of entertainment there, sir. The nights.
In other words, this is a tourism cluster.
Yeah, I guess yes.
It is a tourism cluster. All right, so don't reveal any secrets. No, say go club, Mario. All right. When you said the Ip Strip, no, not the Ip Strip about. I've never really gone down that side, so I don't know.
I'm a friend named that, sir. I'm just following it.
Okay. So the point though, in terms of cluster, and I wanted to explain this to you because it's a theory that is not only relevant in international trade. When I was teaching at UA, I actually had to teach it as a part of cultural and creative industries. And I'm just explaining the core of the theory. What the theory is really saying is that in each country, what should happen is that the groups of companies should form a cluster to make the country overall competitive to outside countries. So what does that mean? It means that if Montego Bay is a tourism cluster, it means that it can become a cluster, an international cluster that attracts people to come to Jamaica versus going to another tourist destination. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Right. So let's get into the theory. I just wanted you to have a basic understanding. Let me play the which one should I play first? Because I think the first one is a little bit. Let me just play the recording and you listening. Let me share a screen. Give me 1 second, just.
A business cluster is a geographic concentration of interconnected businesses, suppliers, and associated institutions in a particular field. Clusters are considered to increase the productivity with which companies can compete, nationally and globally. In urban studies, the term agglomeration is used. Clusters are also very important aspects of strategic management. The term business cluster, also known as an industry cluster, competitive cluster, or Porterian cluster, was introduced and popularized by Michael Porter in The Comparative Advantage of Nations, 1990. The importance of economic geography, or more correctly geographical economics, was also brought to attention by Paul Krugman in Geography and Trade, 1991. Cluster development has since become a focus for many government programs. The underlying concept, which economists have referred to as agglomeration economies, dates back to 1890, and the work of Alfred Marshall. Michael Porter claims that clusters have the potential to affect competition in three ways: by increasing the productivity of the companies in the cluster, by driving innovation in the field, and by stimulating new businesses in the field. According to Porter, in the modern global economy, comparative advantage, how certain locations have special endowments, that is, harbor, cheap labor, to overcome heavy input costs, is less relevant. Now, competitive advantage, how companies make productive use of inputs, requiring continual innovation, is more important. Porter argues that economic activities are embedded in social activities, that social glue binds clusters together. This is supported by recent research showing that particularly in regional and rural areas, significantly more innovation takes place in communities which have stronger interpersonal networks. Put in another way, a business cluster is a geographical location where enough resources and competences amass reach a critical threshold, giving it a key position in a given economic branch of activity, and with a decisive sustainable competitive advantage over other places, or even a world supremacy in that field, for example Silicon Valley and Hollywood. In the mid to late 1990s, several successful computer technology-related companies emerged in Silicon Valley and California. This led anyone who wished to create a startup company to do so in Silicon Valley. The surge in the number of Silicon Valley startups led to a number of venture capital firms relocating to or expanding their Valley offices. This in turn encouraged more entrepreneurs to locate their startups there. In other words, venture capitalists, sellers of finance, and .com startups, buyers of finance, clustered in and around a geographical area. The cluster effect in the capital market also led to a cluster effect in the labor market. As an increasing number of companies started up in Silicon Valley, programmers, engineers etc. realized that they would find greater job opportunities by moving to Silicon Valley. This concentration of technically skilled people in the Valley meant that startups around the country knew that their chances of finding job candidates with the proper skill sets were higher in the Valley, hence giving them added incentive to move there. This in turn led to more high-tech workers moving there. Similar effects have also been found in the Cambridge IT cluster, UK.
All right, talk to me about the cluster, the concept of cluster now.
Well, sir, it really drives development and innovation.
Yes.
When the video just started, the Silicon Valley came to mind, and then I heard the lady say it.
Right.
Based on my understanding of it, the big IT boom, where a lot of persons were moving out after the computer came in the 70s, 80s, and then everybody wanted to build on it to give persons the option of creating software, hardware, including like microchips and all that. So when everybody kind of went to that location, it really gave persons an option to live one, right? It gave them like quicker access to certain materials, certain software, certain hardware. It is that you want to create something, you may find that a manufacturer of certain microchips are nearby.
Exactly.
But, yeah, persons, as you said, persons relocate to the area, so it's easier to probably find a programmer to build something for you, right? So it does really, the clusters definitely does drive innovation and growth, based on what I now understand about it.
Yes. So, and the point with the cluster now is to think about it as, use it as a way to explain regionalism, the whole notion of a trading block, because the cluster at that level is geographic and economic. So the concept is not just looking at local clusters, but even regional blocks, speaking about regionalism and so forth. So that's part of the importance of international trade, trade theory to explain why countries might come together to form trading blocks or regional blocks, economic blocks, form multilateral agreements, and also to how countries position themselves in terms of for international trade by forming localized clusters. So Silicon Valley, they're going to, the companies there that is within that cluster will be trading at the individual level, or participating at the individual level in international trade, because they have become a center of innovation and research and competitiveness. And remember, we spoke about the fact that part of what the whole notion of comparative advantage speaks to is the notion of lower cost of production, competitive pricing, efficient means of production, and lower labor costs. And the video was speaking to some of that. There's another component to the notion of clustering that I want you to also listen to. So here we go again. And as I said before, the theory relating to clusters is not just only for the concept of clustering goes outside of international trade, as I was giving you the example of, for example, tourism clusters, entertainment cluster, business clusters, things and those kinds of examples, because I've used the theory also to explain cultural clusters and creative industries clusters and how those particular things help, for example, the performing arts and other forms of arts to survive because they are really functioning together as a kind of a trading block, quote unquote. So let's listen at some more now to about clusters. Let me share my screen.
What exactly is a cluster? Clusters are considered effective models for economic growth all over the world. But what exactly is a cluster? A cluster occurs when a group of similar and related firms in close geographic proximity come together to act on common interests. Clusters bring critical mass and allow smaller businesses to influence their stakeholders. This provides a unified voice, which is powerful for getting people to listen. Clusters also foster innovation among businesses, providing opportunities to develop and diversify. As a result, businesses are more competitive and can stay updated on changes within their industry. Naturally, this can lead to increased profitability and sustainability. This has flow-on effects for the wider community, leading to growth at a regional level and building strong communities. This brings us to the Northern Adelaide Plains. The region is a natural cluster, and our new cluster project can help take it to the next level. Check out www.northernadelaide.com.au for more information.
All right, so even though they were advertising their own little thing at the end, another thing that came out of the concept of cluster is that when, for example, farmers come together and in a specific country and function as a cluster, they can actually make the wheat that is coming out of their region more competitively priced than another country. All right, so and also too, clusters can affect policy relating to international trade because they can pressure their governments to, for example, affect trading policies developed at the World Trade Organization, or things that happen at the World Bank or at the International Monetary Fund. All right, so I'm hoping that you understand the notion of cluster. So we're going to go a little deeper now in terms of because Porter's theory doesn't end there. He has built or expanded on the notion of clusters called the diamond theory. Let me just, and as I said before, guys, theories, it is coming on your exam. Let me just see. All right, so share screen. So Porter's diamond theory. Let's bring this back.
In this short video, I'll summarize the concept of Porter's diamond. Porter's diamond is a model developed by Michael Porter. It is a tool which is often used to analyze the external competitive environment or marketplace, which helps companies to determine the relative strength and explain why certain industries have become competitive or possess regional advantages. In this model, the regional advantages can be assessed by 4 factors, which include firm strategy and rivalry, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and factor input conditions. This is a graphical representation of Porter's diamond, showing how the 4 factors interact. There are also times when the government could also influence a regional advantage. Firm strategy and rivalry is the competition in the home market that drives innovation and quality. When there's lots of competition and lots of rivalry, this keeps companies on their toes, and so they try to outcompete each other by continually developing more innovative and quality products and services. A demand condition is a country with sophisticated home buyers that have an awareness and demand for advanced quality and innovative products, which can create international competitiveness. Related and supporting industries are the inputs for a company, which drives its success. For example, raw materials from fabric suppliers in Italy helps to drive the success of the fashion Milan industry. And finally, factor input conditions are the factors of production that include things like skilled labor, education, capital, climate, and infrastructure. An example where Porter's diamond can be used to explain a regional advantage is in Germany's luxury high-power car manufacturing industry for brands like BMW and Audi, etc. So the car manufacturing industry in Germany has a regional advantage because it satisfies the 4 key factors in Porter's diamond. With firm strategy and rivalry, we see that there is strong rivalry amongst lots of car manufacturers, and so they compete intensely and keep developing more innovative and quality products. There are certain demand conditions amongst the home buyers. In Germany, there are no speed limits, so the sophisticated home buyers want more powerful cars. Therefore, the industry aims to develop innovative engines to cater for this particular need. In Germany, there are related and supporting industries, such as the iron and steel industry, which provides materials for the car manufacturers. There are also high level of education and training within the workforce. Banks also provide capital, and there are also component suppliers and IT infrastructure. There are also factor conditions, which include skilled engineers from renowned universities, and the government's focus on scientific research, which helps to push the car manufacturing industry. The government has played an important role in creating a regional advantage, as it supported and funded scientific research and launched the construction of more roads and canals in the 19th century. By satisfying all these factors in Porter's diamond, it therefore helps to explain why Germany's luxury high-power car manufacturing industry has a regional advantage. If you like this video, don't forget...
All right, so do we understand this Porter's diamond concept? And as I said before, it speaks to the whole notion of regional advantage. And to some extent, it's kind of developing, or it's not necessarily the same thing as Porter's cluster concept, but you can see where the whole notion of the cluster concept could come in, because when there is the cluster concept in a particular country or region, as it says, competition drives innovation and quality. So the whole notion of Porter's diamonds trade theory is to determine the strengths and relative strength, and explain why certain industries have become competitive or possess regional advantages. And for example, France has a regional advantage in international trade in terms of wine. All right, and they give various, these are the 4 factors in Porter's diamond. If you're answering a question on this, you would have to ensure that you mention these particular terms and then explain what they mean. All right. Any questions? Is this theory clear?
Clear enough now, sir.
Clear enough? Yes. So as the firm and strategy rival, it says competition in the home market that drives innovation and quality. In other words, because there's high competition in the country itself or in the region, companies are constantly trying to outbid each other. And as a result, you find that the cost of production is lower, the price is better, the quality of the car is better. And the kinds of features that are offered, that the car offer, are way better. And you'll find that there's an international demand for these kinds of cars, because especially if the car is cost effective and is very functional. Then it says demand conditions. A country with sophisticated home buyers who have an awareness and demand for advanced quality and innovative products, which can create international competitiveness. In other words, there are persons in the country who will buy outside of the country if they feel that the quality of the products that are being made locally are not good enough. And I'm sure that is a situation where many companies, they outsource certain things because it might be too expensive in their own country, or the quality is not up to standard. Then it says related and supported industries. And this is too now where the whole notion of concepts come into play. Inputs for a company drives its success, where a company might need, has to rely on other players to ensure its own success. And the whole notion of Silicon Valley comes to mind. Then it says factor or conditions, the factors of production that include skilled labor, education. Again, the notion of Silicon Valley, and even the debate in the United States Congress with the President of the United States about America regaining its competitiveness in terms of infrastructure. Japan, China is outbidding or is outdoing America in terms of technology. You're talking about transportation, because that in and of itself affects things like supply chain, things like that. All right, so it's very, very important to use this theory really to just explain international trade. So whenever you're answering a question relating to theory and international trade, always use specific examples, not hypothetical examples. I'm not giving any marks for hypothetical examples. You must give me specific examples because there's a lot of research that has been done on these particular theories. People have done PhDs and so forth. All right. The other theory now that I want us to look at, are there any questions? I just want to know. Christopher Johnson, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, Kayla Poiser. Kayla Poiser.
Yes, sir.
Are you understanding what is happening?
Yes, sir.
I'm seeing Rachel Rose. What about you? Everything is okay?
Yes, sir.
Ramon Grosset.
Yes, sir.
Are you understanding what is happening?
I am.
Shanique Samuels. Okay, so let's move on. The other theory now that we're going to touch on is what is called the international product life cycle trade theory. So I'm going to share a screen, and it is somewhat similar to product life cycle that I'm not sure if you guys have done. If you guys have done introduction to marketing, have you principles of marketing?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. So it's not very difficult to understand. It's really talking about international trade in the context of when a product is produced and it moves from country of origin to other countries in the international market. Let's just listen in. Here it is. I'm going to share screen.
Institute has identified the essential components of e-commerce and constructed.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Business School 101. The International Product Lifecycle Theory was authored by Raymond Vernon, an American economist from Harvard University in the 1960s, to explain the cycle that products go through when exposed to an international market. The cycle describes how a product matures and declines because of internationalization. As you can see in the picture, there are three stages contained within Vernon's theory, namely the new product stage, the maturing product stage, and the standardized product stage. In addition, Vernon categorized the world into three different groups: the innovating country, other advanced countries, and less developed countries. In the graph, the blue line indicates the amount of production for the new product, the green line indicates the amount of consumption. The blue area means that the country has a net export for the product. Contrarily, the green area means the country has a net import for the product. Vernon's theory suggests that early in a product's life cycle, all the parts and labor associated with that product come from the area where it was invented. After the product is adopted and used in the global market, production gradually moves away from the point of origin. In some situations, the product becomes an item that is imported by its original country of invention. Let's discuss each of these stages separately. First, the new product stage. The cycle always begins with the introduction of a new product. In this stage, a corporation in a developed country will innovate a new product. The market for this product will be small and sales will be relatively low as a result. Vernon deduced that innovative products are more likely to be created in a developed nation because the buoyant economy means that people have more disposable income to use on new products. To offset the impact of low sales, corporations will keep the manufacturer of the product local, so that as process issues arise, or a need to modify the product in its infancy stage, changes can be implemented without too much risk and without wasting time. As sales increase, Corporations may start to export the product out to other developed nations to increase sales and revenue. This is a straightforward step towards the internationalization of a product because the appetites of people within developed nations tend to be quite similar. Second, the maturing product stage. At this point, when the product has firmly established demand in the innovating country and other advanced countries, the manufacturer of the product will need to consider opening up production plants in other advanced countries to reduce the production cost and meet the increasing demand. Meanwhile, the product development in the innovating country can still occur at this stage because there is still some room to adapt and modify the product if needed. Although the unit costs have decreased due to the decision to produce the product in other advanced countries, the manufacturer of the product will still require a highly skilled labor force. Local competition to offer alternatives start to form. As the product becomes more matured and affordable, it begins to reach the countries that have a less developed economy, and demand from those nations start to grow. Last, the standardized product stage. At this stage, exports to nations with the less developed economy begin in earnest. Competitive product offers saturate the market, which means that the original purveyor of the product loses their competitive edge on the basis of innovation. In response to this, the corporation focuses on driving down the production cost by moving facilities to nations where the average income is much lower, and by standardizing and streamlining the manufacturing methods needed to make the product. The local workforce in lower income nations are then exposed to the technology and methods to make the product, and competitors begin to rise as they did in developed nations previously. Meanwhile, demand in the original nation, where the product came from, begins to decline and eventually dwindles as a new product grabs the attention of the people. The market for the new product is now completely saturated, and the innovating corporation leaves the manufacture of the product in low-income countries and switches its focus to a new product as it bows gracefully out of the market. What is left of the market share is divided up between predominantly foreign competitors, and people in the original country who want the product at this point will most likely buy an imported version of the product from a nation where the incomes are lower. Meanwhile, developed countries are investing in innovating new technologies with new products, then another new cycle starts. Historically, the product lifecycle theory seems to be an accurate explanation of international trade patterns. Let's use a photocopier as an example. The photocopier was first developed in the early 1960s by Xerox in the United States and sold initially to American users. Originally, Xerox exported photocopiers from the United States primarily to Japan and the advanced countries of Western Europe. As demand began to grow in those countries, Xerox entered into joint ventures to set up production in Japan and Great Britain. In addition, once Xerox's patents on the photocopier process expired, other foreign competitors such as Canon in Japan began to enter the market. As a consequence, exports from the United States declined, and the U.S. users began to buy some of the photocopiers from lower-cost foreign sources, particularly Japan. In the 90s, Japanese companies found that manufacturing costs are too high in their own country, so they switched production to some developing countries, such as Vietnam and Thailand. Thus, initially the United States and then other advanced countries, like Japan, have switched from being exporters of photocopiers to importers. This evolution in the pattern of international trade in photocopiers is consistent with the predictions of the product lifecycle theory. However, the product lifecycle theory is not without weaknesses. It suffers from two major limitations. First, viewed from an Asian or European perspective, Vernon's argument that most new products are developed and introduced in the United States seems ethnocentric and increasingly dated. Although it may be true that during the U.S. dominance of the global economy, most new products were introduced in the United States, there have always been important exceptions. These exceptions appear to have become increasingly common in recent years. For example, video game consoles were first introduced in Japan, and new wireless phones were first introduced in Europe. Second, with the increased integration of the world economy, a growing number of new products such as laptop computers, cars, and smartphones are now introduced simultaneously in both developed and developing countries. This may be accompanied by multinational corporations' globally dispersed production and marketing strategies. So, what do you think of the international product lifecycle theory? Do you think it is still a valuable theory? Please leave your thoughts in a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next.
If you want to lose up to 20 pounds...
All right. Is it very clear? Is that theory very clear? Very clear, people? Hello? Is it very clear? People, can you answer, please? Hello?
Sir, getting it, sir, getting it.
Okay. Can you relate what you understand? Can you just speak to me what you understand?
So you know, so I'm kind of caught up on the work, you know. Not really have much time. I just don't want to give a response quickly, sir. But I was listening.
Okay. Anybody wants to try and explain? All right, let me just recap because I need to finish this theory thing. All right, so the international product life cycle, they're talking about how, for example, new products are introduced in the international market and is kind of traded, well, it's not kind of, it's traded across countries. So the assumption was that, first of all, innovation usually begins in the United States. And of course, you hear the criticism of that because that is not always the case. So there's the introduction of a new product by a corporation, and this usually happens in a developed country, primarily the United States, and it keeps the manufacturing of that product in the United States. And as sales increase, they export it to other developed countries because of the similarity in terms of lifestyle and also what we call spending power. They usually have high spending power and high consumption rate. Then, of course, as the product matures, it is called the maturing. As the product matures, they open other manufacturing plants in other developed countries as a way to reduce cost and also to meet the high levels of demand. Then in the latter part now, which is the standardized product stage, this is where now they're driving down the cost of production because there is increasing demand, which means that there's more to produce. So what they do, they standardize the product in this case and usually produce it in developing countries. And they give you the example of Xerox starting in the United States and all of that. The important thing to note about this theory is that it explains the pattern of international trade. And to some extent, the theory might have its weaknesses, but it also has its strength. The important criticism I think you should take away from this is that in international trade, because of globalization and internationalization, the whole notion of regional blocks and world trade, products are now being simultaneously developed in both developing and developed countries. All right, and simultaneous means at the same time. All right, so that's the takeaway from that theory. The other theory, as I said before, I want to really finish off with these theories. The other theory now is the Hexker-Hullin model of international trade. Let's just listen in. And please, people, try to understand. And as I said before, take some amount of notes or whatever.
Hello and welcome to this next video in our series on trade theories. In this video we're going to be looking at the Heckscher-Ohlin theory and then following on with the Leontief paradox. Alright then, let's get started. You'll remember from previous videos and from maybe your previous readings that David Ricardo thought of the idea of comparative advantage. And comparative advantage comes from differences in efficiency of production. And therefore Ricardo claimed that comparative advantage explained two things. One, why trade was beneficial to two parties, even if one party had absolute advantage in all production. And B, it explained the patterns of trade between countries. countries with a comparative advantage in that product would export to the other country. Now, the Heckscher and Olin theory still believes that free trade is beneficial to everyone, but explains the benefits and the patterns of trade in a different way. It looks at the factors of production: land, labour and capital. Let's have a look at two fictional countries to explain it. Okay, we have country A, a quite small country, has a lot of land, quite a lot of capital and not much labour. Country B, well, these things are a bit more evenly divided up, but it has more labour than the other two factors. So 40% or so labour compared with 23 and 35% land. Notice that B is much bigger, and that although land is only 35% of its factors production, it still has much more land than country A, even though in country A, land makes up 60% of the factors of production. So what did Heckscher and Olin say about this? So they posited the idea that countries with a relative abundance of a particular factor of production would export products that used those factors, used that factor to produce goods. So looking at these, A here has 60% of its factors of production is land, whereas B, it's only 35%. So they predicted that country A would export products using land to country B. Country A also has a relative abundance of capital, 30% of its factors, as opposed to 23% of its factors for country B. So products that required a lot of capital input to make them would be exported from country A to country B. And for country B, well, country B has a lot of labour. 42% of its factor production is labour. So we would use labour as a factor of production to export to country A. And this makes sense. If you have a lot of something, it's going to be cheaper, relatively. So a lot of labour means that labour is relatively cheap, so therefore you would have an advantage in products that use labour. And likewise for country A. They have a lot of land relative to the other factors, therefore because it is abundant and plentiful, it's probably going to be cheaper than the other things. And so therefore they will be able to use this factor as an advantage for production and export. And this makes total sense. If you have a lot of something, it will be cheaper, and therefore you're probably more likely to be able to use it as an advantage. And this is very appealing to economists. And for a long time, the Heckscher-Olin theory was accepted as a way of explaining patterns of global trade. But then, in the 1950s, came the work of Wassily Leontief. He had a look at American trade and American imports and exports, and he had expected to find that America would export more goods that were capital intensive that are imported from other countries. However, his data showed the opposite. In fact, America was importing more capital intensive goods than it was exporting capital intensive goods, and hence the paradox. And we don't really understand why this is, although recent work is giving us some clues. It could be the nature of the labour that explains America's exports of more labour-intensive goods. Think of software, for example. This is highly skilled labour that America has a plentiful supply of, especially in Silicon Valley and other parts of the States as well, maybe Texas and the Northeast around Boston and New York area. And they're producing perhaps most of the world's innovative software, and they're exporting that to all of us. So perhaps we can bring comparative advantage back into the equation. maybe differences in technology can have an effect on these factors of production. So if we're using technology with our labor becomes more efficient. And so even though America may have more capital and labor may be relatively less abundant than land and capital, for example, the effect of high technology increases the productivity of the labor so much that it makes up for this relative lack of abundance. Once we've controlled for technology in our statistics and our data, we do see that countries do indeed tend to export products that rely on locally abundant factors of production and import products that are relatively scarce locally. So the Heckscher-Ohlin theory isn't dead yet. Relative abundance of factors of production still does seem to have some way of explaining the patterns of trade across the world. Okay, and in the next video we will have a look at new trade theory.
All right, not sure if you understand that, but they're talking about the relative factors of production, and this particular theory speaks to land, labor, and capital. And the assumption is that if I have more of one thing, then that of course would give me somewhat of an advantage, a competitive advantage, or even an absolute advantage in terms of international trade. And the example was given between country A and country B about abundance of labor and all of that. But there was this notion of paradox, and paradox means something that you think about it first and it really doesn't make sense, but when you really think about it, it actually makes sense. And a very English example of paradox is, I always use the example of Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston is rich but is in need. Is rich but is in need, or the child is the father of the man. All right, so, and the paradox comes in where America has a lot of capital and probably technology over other countries, but they found that America was really still importing a whole lot of these things, because remember now, the abundance of labor, for example, is, you have to look at other factors in relation to the abundance of labor, because labor, it could be that those other countries are also using technology as a way to their advantage. And think about China, the relationship between China and the United States. China has an abundance of labor. America has abundance of capital. And what China has really done is to outbid America in terms of production, because China now produces, because it has an abundance of labor, it is able to produce goods at a lower cost. Therefore, America now is importing a lot of goods from China. Another example I just thought about is the fact that the United States dollar is used for international trade. And you know, the United States always says it is the richest country in the world. But what China has done, and so even though America has, quote unquote, technically has more money than China, or use it, or has the, or is the dollar that is used for international trade, how China has outbid them in terms of international trade is to lower the value of its dollar, which makes its goods and even services more competitively priced. So people are going to buy goods from China versus those that are made in the United States. And what has even happened in the United States is that because of this, America, some of the American companies, multinational corporations, they have moved their production factories to China, because China has a lot of labor. And also coupled with the fact that China is able to lower the cost of its dollar, making its goods and services more competitively priced. And the other theory, and I think this is the last one, is the new trade theory. This is the last one. And I want for you to think about the new trade theory in terms of, originally we talked about mercantilism and how, for example, at that point in time, in terms of international trade, countries somewhat were kind of insular. Under mercantilism, countries were very insular, did not want to really trade well, they traded other countries, but they did it really in a way where there were trade barriers. So under mercantilism, the notion was to acquire wealth through restrictive trade policies, and it was about the notion of maximizing exports and minimizing imports. And I did talk about the fact that this is partly what happened with the European colonization of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And what they really did was to extract the wealth from, or the raw materials from, the colonies to create products that they later exported to other countries. All right, so let's look at the new trade theory. So the new trade theory now is really explaining international trade, let's say after World War II, more or less after World War II, in terms of where you now have regulations and international bodies that regulate trade, and countries kind of forming bilateral and multilateral agreements. All right, let's look at that. Let's listen into that theory. And it's going to start out with product life cycle first and then go into that theory, because product life cycle is also seen as a part of new trade theory.
In this video, we're going to look at the first couple of more contemporary theories of international trade. And the first that we'll have a look at here is the product life cycle theory. Now, this was a theory that was developed in the mid-1960s by a guy called Raymond Vernon, who proposed that as products mature, both the location of sales and the optimal production location will also change, in turn affecting the flow and direction of international trade. Now, it must be said here that Vernon was from the United States, and as such, his theory here is very much US-centric. It focuses heavily on the US market. And so keep that in mind as we move through these points. He said that the size and wealth of the US market gave US firms a strong incentive to develop new products, which was certainly true at the time. Initially, according to Vernon, the product would be produced and sold in the United States. That is, it was marketed in the US given its high levels of disposable income and sophisticated demand. As that demand began to grow somewhat slightly, at least in other markets, the US firms would then recognise their opportunities here for exporting, and so that, according to Vernon, was the logical first step. As that demand for the new products continued to grow in other advanced economies, over time, it became more worthwhile for those US producers, and indeed some foreign producers, to actually start manufacturing this product in those foreign markets to actually cater to their respective needs. According to Vernon, once a product then became even more mature, it eventually got to the point where the key differentiating feature, was the price of the product, and that in turn forced many producers to then look for cheaper locations to manufacture their product, which ultimately often led to a situation where firms were exporting that product back into the United States at a lower cost. So that was the general process of international trade, according to Vernon. In terms of what he believed the role of government was in that process, he argued effectively and on a very simple level that they needed to ensure that the economy was robust and continued to grow, certainly within the US to support that demand for these new products, and then even on a global scale to support foreign production and exporting on that international level. Now, it must also be said here that some of you may have recognized the picture in the top right corner isn't, in fact, Raymond Vernon. That is Led Zeppelin. This is Raymond Vernon. Maybe not quite as much of a rock star as the other guys, but nonetheless a very much a seminal contributor to our understanding of international business today. Sorry, Vernon. In terms of the current relevance of the product life cycle theory, certainly it did accurately explain what happened for products like photocopiers and a number of other technology-related products developed in the 60s and the 70s in the United States. Today, though, its relevance is perhaps less significant. What we've seen is that globalization and the subsequent integration of the world economy has made it less applicable to many parts and many industries today. As I mentioned before, the theory is very much ethnocentric. It is heavily revolved and based around the US market and the belief that the US market is best and most conducive to supporting these types of industries. And we've seen that that simply isn't always the case. Certainly.
All right, so I'm going to move it along in the interest of time so that we, right, new trade theory.
Large scale of output can have important implications for industry. And it suggests that the ability of firms to tackle theory today. The next trade theory we're going to have a look at here is, funnily enough, called the new trade theory. And it suggests that the ability of firms to gain economies of scale, which are unit cost reductions associated with a large scale of output, can have important implications for international trade. And there are two key contributions that we're going to focus on today from this theory that have key implications for international business. The first relates to the increasing product variety and reduced prices that we see emerging from international trade. And the second highlights the importance of what are known as first mover advantages. And we're going to go through each of these in turn. All right, so as I said, one of the first key contributions of the new trade theory is highlighting the relationship between international trade and the increasing number of products which are available, and also the lower cost.
All right, so we're going to stop here. I'll pick up on new trade theory in the following class, as well as go into the new topic. All right. I know the theories can be a little bit difficult to understand at the very beginning. What I suggest you do is to find a way to integrate them in your papers, whether it be your tutorial paper or your research paper. And I'll address the research paper. There was a question about it in the last class. In the WhatsApp group, I'll address it in the following class, as well as Turnitin, uploading to Turnitin, because I want you guys to get it right. I saw somebody put in the chat that sent me some paper to review, but I can't do that right now. I have a class right after I have a class right now, actually. So I'll try to see if I can look at it afterwards. Persons who are supposed to present on Wednesday. Today's Wednesday, right? Oh, darn. Yes, there was supposed to be a presentation today. All right, so we'll do that presentation on Monday. No, Monday's a holiday. So we're going to have two presentations on Wednesday. Two presentations next week, Wednesday. It will be the persons who are the persons who are supposed to present today. Who are the persons supposed to present today? I didn't even remember the way time ran out. Who are the persons who are supposed to present today?
Check your phone, sir. Sir Clark,
yes,
what time do we have to submit that thing to Turnitin tonight?
Hold on. Who are the persons who are supposed to present today? Can I just get that answer, please, before we go into that? Can the persons are not in the class? Who are the persons who are supposed to present today? All right, so let me check my own document. Tutorial. No, those are the papers. Coursework document. Today is the week of the 28th. Right, so it's supposed to be Parnell and Samuels. You presented already, right?
Yes, sir, but Parnell is no longer part of the group because I'm going to sit out the semester.
Oh, he's going to sit out the semester. Oh, okay. How unfortunate. Oh, so there was not anyone booked for this week. Because today is Wednesday, right, guys? Yeah. All right. So we take up, in other words, we took a break really to finish. Well, it's actually good. So we pick up our tutorials on August 9. So we're not doing it August. Well, yes. So next week. Next week is August 9. No, it's the week after because I didn't put it in the lip. So August 9, we have two presenters, Wayne Barnes, two sets of peers, Wayne, Maurice Fowler, and Mario Bailey, looking at descriptive international trade theories. And then the week after we have, not the week after, the same two groups on the same day in the same class, Wayne Barnes and Nisha Headlam Robinson. So Maurice and Mario, they're looking at the descriptive international theories, and Wayne Barnes and Nisha, they're looking at prescriptive international trade theories, all right? And as I said before, we have completed the theories for the most part. Don't choose a theory that you're going to have any difficulties with. And I've uploaded some information on Canvas about it. Again, too, I will upload the recordings relating to this trade theory to the lecture that we did today. And this is not the first time we're talking about the theories. It's just that I wanted to reinforce some of the ideas and complete it. Have a good evening, everybody. And the persons who are supposed to upload, let me talk to you after. I'll talk to you via email. Just ensure you email me your paper. Is that Ramon? Ramon, that's you, right?
Yes, sir.
Email me your paper. You're supposed to upload today?
That's what you said.
All right, so email me your paper. I will upload it for you. Email me your paper. Have you emailed it to me already?
I'm making adjustments, sir.
All right, so usually I have up until 11:59 to upload. All right, I want it by 10 o'clock.
No problem.
All right, cool. Have a good evening, everybody.